Hello everyone, and welcome back to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fundamental pillar of international finance, and that is how governments actually handle their borrowing needs. You see, when a country needs to outspend the revenue it brings in, well, it has to borrow. But where that money comes from, that completely changes the economic impact. Think of the government as having two totally distinct financial wallets to draw from. So let's explore exactly what happens when they reach into each one.
Okay, so imagine your government urgently needs cash for, say, a massive new infrastructure project. They can't just print money out of thin air without facing some serious consequences, right? So they need a loan. And this sets up a pretty simple binary choice. They can either look inward, entirely within their own borders, or they can cross international lines and look outward. And let me tell you, the balance they strike between these two paths defines their public debt and has absolutely massive consequences for the domestic economy.
So let's crack open that first wallet. Internal debt. The definition here is super straightforward. Internal debt is money raised by the government directly from individuals and institutions right inside its own borders. Honestly, if you've ever bought a government savings bond, you have personally funded your country's internal debt. The government is essentially just borrowing from its own domestic citizens and local financial institutions.
Now, the really crucial question here is, what does this actually do to the economy? Well, this internal money is primarily used to finance development. We're talking new roads, schools, hospitals, the whole shebang. But here is the key takeaway. Because this money is raised locally and spent locally, the funds literally never leave the house. Because of that, the country's overall national income remains completely unchanged. The money is basically just shifting from one pocket to another within the exact same economic household.
But, what happens when that domestic wallet just isn't enough? That is exactly when the government pivots and opens up wallet number 2, external debt. This is when the government steps outside its own borders to get the cash. External debt is defined as funds borrowed from foreign individuals, international institutions, foreign commercial banks, or even the governments of totally different countries. So in this case, the borrower is domestic, but the lender? Entirely foreign.
And when we look at who is actually holding this external debt, we are talking about some pretty heavy-hitting international players. Governments will secure massive loans from global bodies like the IMF or the World Bank, usually for huge structural projects that just require way more capital than a local economy can provide. But they'll also tap right into foreign commercial banks, or even strike direct state-to-state lending deals with other nations.
Now, this brings us to a highly specific use case for this second foreign wallet. Just like internal debt, external debt is absolutely used to fund large development, but it has a very unique purpose too, and that is meeting balance of payment deficits. See, when a country imports vastly more goods than it exports, it ends up owing money in foreign currencies. So a government often has to lean on external debt simply to get their hands on that foreign exchange and bridge that international trade gap.
All right, but securing the money is really only half the story. In economics, the tension always comes from the repayment. Whether it's internal or external, these loans aren't free, right? They carry interest. So I want you to really think about this for a second. What happens to a country's broader economy when the bill for these debts finally comes due? Because this is where the choice between those two wallets creates a drastic economic divergence. And here is the absolute climax of this economic contrast. When a government pays interest on its internal debt, that cash just cycles right back to its own domestic citizens. National income stays perfectly flat. But with external debt, that interest payment physically leaves the economy. This transfer of wealth abroad directly reduces the national income of the debtor country, which obviously imposes a much, much heavier burden on the local economy.
Now, hearing all that external debt reduces national income and places this heavy burden on the economy, you might be thinking, wow, foreign borrowing is just a terrible idea. Actually, scratch that. We need to break that common misconception right here and now. Economics is rarely ever that black and white. External debt is a tool, and like any financial tool, it's not inherently bad just because the interest leaves the country. It all comes down to how it's applied. Which brings us to our final golden rule straight from the source text. It says, external debt should not be considered bad if the same are used for productive purposes. If a government borrows from abroad to build new railways, power grids, or heavy industries that are going to generate massive new revenue down the line, well, that debt basically pays for itself and actually grows the economy. So I'm going to leave you with this question to ponder. When your own government opens up that foreign wallet and takes on external debt, are they truly using it to build a productive future, or are they just passing the burden on to tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those tough economic questions.